the reason to do some of the work that we do, especially Midnight Mass, which is very much about community and about both the destructive components of community, but also the healing components of them. And that process was as much about making that show as it was about just getting people back into a system where they felt like they could support each other and do anything, not just make a show, but just to show up and say, I support you, we're going to work through it, we're going to communicate, we're going to care about each other. Yeah, I'm Michael Fimognari. I'm a cinematographer, and I'm based out of Pittsburgh. So we're talking about Midnight Mass, which was written by Mike Flanagan, and it's about an island community that has been dying over decades from devastating oil spills, and because it's a fishing island, and they are a community that's very religious. And a young priest shows up one day, and supernatural things start to happen, and we learn later that it's a transformation, a vampiric transformation, and it brings them youth and strength. But what the story is really talking about is how faith can be both a positive and a negative, as it's used by a collective to form agendas, to be critical of people for who they are, what they believe. And it's also a story about forgiveness and about, our place in the universe. So we're talking about vampires, but we're talking about something much more human than that. Mike been working on it for, like you said, a long time. And it was a story that he even put into other films that we had been making, little Easter eggs. And so I was aware of it. We didn't really start it until 2019, I think, is when we started prep. I started working with Mike in 2012 on Oculus, and it's been a lot of years of working together, and it's just been the most rewarding partnership, friendship, collaboration of my career. He's obviously a master storyteller, but more than that, he's also able to communicate what it is that he wants, both on thematic levels, but also on the specificity, the details. And because he's able to do that, he empowers everybody to do their best work in their sphere. But the real joy of that is that we're aligned on how we tell stories, and we just truly enjoy the work together. It's fantastic. When I was in film school, I was fortunate to be mentored by the great Woody Omens, and we had lots of meetings and talks over the years. And one of the more memorable things he said to me was that he wishes for all filmmakers, but especially for cinematographers, that they find a director who they can feel is a partner, a true collaborator. And I'm very lucky to have that with Mike. And so because we've worked together for so long and we continue to refine our process, our creative process, there's a shorthand there that when we walk in the door on day one of whatever it is, we're really standing on day 400, or what, all the other experiences that we've shared and all the ways that we want to elevate and make sharper the work that we do. And so with Midnight Mass, knowing not only was that a passion project for him, and that it's something that he's had in his mind for so long, so he came prepared on another level as well. So that just meant that our day one was a pretty strong place to be. It's a more grounded version of the supernatural stories that we've told before, and we wanted that to feel as honest in its world building with less fantasy and less of the cinema and the cinematic artifice in the way of it. And so we felt strongly that while we wanted it to be beautiful, we did want it to be honest. It is also a story about the simple natural elements of life. We're talking about water, we're talking about survival methods on an island, we're talking about storms, we're talking about kinetic light, and also both the danger of light as it relates to the vampire element of it, but also the revelation of light. So that meant for us, it was important that we kept it honest in its visual approach as a lighting, from a lighting perspective. That said, it has horror elements, and we want to enjoy the journey, and there's a heightened quality to it. We weren't going to punctuate those heightened qualities necessarily in the lighting. They were going to be honest from a lighting point of view. And so we were looking for other ways to find heightened visual aesthetics. So our research was mostly grounded in time of day and how to use those lighting components, the color, the direction of the light, the quality of the light, and how that would inform the beats within a scene. And some of that's baked into a scene. When someone's going to hold their hand into a beam of light and it's going to burn them, like, just the nature of the behavior is going to do the work, right? So we shot with the Alexa LF. Prior to Midnight Mass, though, we had shot Gerald's Game, The Haunting of Hill House, and Dr. Sleep, all with the Alexa 65. We really liked the big format for those projects, all spherical formats. The choice to go with the LF came in part from the lens discussion, so which is the excitement of talking today with you about it, and also in part because it's a smaller camera than the 65, and we were in more intimate spaces, island homes and boats, and or lots of Steadicam, things where we wanted a lighter camera to be able to move. But the real reason we ended up with the LF is because of the Atlas lenses, is because we were open to the idea of, while the lighting was grounded, where the optics took on a little bit more expressive quality. That's where we started to explore this idea of shooting with anamorphic lenses, which is what made the LF the right camera. The approach to the storytelling, while aware that at some point it'll be streamed when it's on Netflix into a home, is still always from a theatrical presentation perspective. So like wide shots that are wide, and so obviously studios vary in terms of their taste, and so the notes that you get from different studios vary in that regard. But as it relates to building the aesthetic and shooting the film, I still think, and I know Mike does, in a big screen construction. Maybe it's just that all those hours in the movie theater as a kid, just seeing it that way, and so when I picture it in my head when we're designing shots, and when I'm standing in front of a monitor on set, I'm seeing it as if I'm sitting in a theater looking at that shot, not on a monitor in my living room. The hope is that it translates. The hope is that the audience will sit down and turn the lights off and put their attention into it. I know the reality of that isn't always the case, but the hope is that by giving it that treatment, whether it's Dr. Sleep on big screens or Midnight Mass through Netflix, it's still a cinematic, sit in the dark on a big screen kind of experience. And so what we were looking for was something that gave a beautifully imperfect quality. And so with anamorphic lenses, you typically will get that. In fact, I find sometimes when anamorphics are so consistent and perfect, they're sort of stealing a little bit of their beauty. And when I say imperfect, I mean in that lovely way, the way that the edges have a different flair than the center, and there's a little smear, and there's something about it that feels like the way the world feels, or like the way that light passes through a fabric and then hits a table. I think that there's something about those Atlas lenses that feels like that. And once we made that choice, the LF became the camera. The discussions that we have about lenses are also, you asked about what your favorite part is. That's also one of my favorite parts in the early going, which is we've talked about what we want this to look like and feel like, and a lot of it's verbal, a lot of it's sound, maybe it's music. We listened to a lot of Neil Diamond in The Office, and there was something about that Mike felt strongly about and connected with. And then there's a point at which you go in to look at lenses, and it's very much an emotional reaction to what you see. And we looked at it and said, that's it. In the early going, as I described the needs, and I described them to the people I trust at Airy Rentals, where I've been working for many years, and Matt Colsey over there is a trusted resource on lenses, and I told him what I was looking for, and he suggested that we look at the Atlas lenses. So that started there. I don't remember how much testing we did. Pretty quickly we knew when we saw the Orions that we were doing that. Technically speaking, one of the other elements we wanted to achieve aesthetically was that, with anamorphics, while you do get the beauty, sometimes you get lens flares that feel like anamorphic lens flares. And we had lots of candlelight. I didn't want to have hundreds of little anamorphic horizontal flares. I wanted it to be more elegant than that. Although I love those flares when they're appropriate, it wasn't appropriate for this. And I also knew, because we wanted to have a lightweight camera, that we wanted lightweight lenses and fast lenses, because one of the things that was really important to me was that we lit as much with candlelight as we could. And one of the first tests that we did that sort of proved the beauty of them was that we just lit a scene with candlelight, and it was gorgeous, and the lenses did the work. A lot of our inspiration comes from what it means to see in the dark and to see in very low light, and that not just for Midnight Mass, but when you're dealing with stories like this, ghost stories, it very much is about what's that perception we feel when we're standing in a dark room and there's only one light source, and you feel like you can see the shape of a room or the shape of a person, but you can't see the details. That's the thing our eyes understand, our mind understands, but then to achieve that with a lens and a camera is a different thing. We had town exteriors to shoot where we had to be in the dark and feel in that feeling of what it's like to stand in a field with just moonlight. And to achieve that with an anamorphic lens was really special. We felt great about that. There's a Goya painting called The Spell that has long inspired me and the work that I do in this genre, but it, in particular for Midnight Mass, had a special place. That painting has all the elements of Midnight Mass. It's candlelight, the transition from dawn to dark, or from dark to dawn, however you want to interpret it. The glow of what it means to be in low light and have the eyes take on that behind the cornea glow, and not let the fire go too warm. It's not a friendly fire, it's a desaturated, almost yellow-white fire. So that's the aesthetic we were looking for. Quite a bit of the lighting, like I was saying, was as practical as we could make it. So we did a lot of stage work for the interiors, but it was always motivated by natural phenomena. So we knew what time of day that scene would take place, and we made sure that the color temperature of the light coming through the windows and the color balance between the shadow color and the sun color and was honest. The sun direction was honest. We were very faithful to true phenomena as it would relate to the light. And then obviously when we were outside in our exteriors, we embraced as much of that as we could. It was important to Mike that we were out there on the ocean, on a boat, and interacting with it. And certainly to the degree that you cannot control a sunrise, and sunrises are a very important part of the transitional moments for these characters, the conclusion of the series. In the world of stage work where you need to create a sunrise and then communicate that to the visual effects world who's going to handle the extension of the ocean they're next to, we were careful to make that sunrise as honest as it would be if you were on a beach and it occurred in a natural space. Similar to what I was saying earlier about being in intimate spaces and being in homes, and we wanted that to feel as truthful as it would be if we wandered into a church. And we built the town, and so it was all a full construction for story purposes, but we treated it like they were real spaces. So we tended to lean more toward wider focal lengths, closer to the subject, which is how you would approach it if you were on location and wandered into the back room of the sheriff's office, and so we tried to keep that as honest to a location shoot as we could. Part of our process is that every shot in every scene is shot listed, and down to the details of the behavior, where the camera would go, and how that relates to the set build, whether it's location or on stage. So there's really no mystery when we show up to do the work. We know exactly what we're expected to do and how that's going to fit into the whole. So we built the town on a blueberry farm outside of Vancouver, and it was in a little valley so that you could look every direction and not see mountains or not see landscape that would prove you weren't on an island. And then there was another part of the town that was meant to be next to a beach, and that was built in a park, like a city park next to the water, that had a view that was a little more restricted, but where we could do all the work that suggested there were piers and homes that were adjacent to beaches. The planning of it became critical. It's always critical, but it became especially critical because we were initially scheduled to start production on March 16th, 2020. And on Friday, the 13th, we were all sent home and didn't know if we would ever make that show. And obviously the show became far less of a priority than everyone's safety and everyone's health everywhere. When we finally did get the green light to go back, a big part of that green light was how prepared we were to make the show. They had built the town next to the beach, and it just sat there for the next 4 months while everyone started to figure out how we would go back into production and whether that was safe. And so there were obviously bigger concerns than just like, hey, let's go back to work. And those had to be addressed. And to the credit of the producers and the credit of Netflix, they did that and trusted us to go back in a really dangerous time and do the work. That was probably the biggest challenge, but also to the credit of the team, their ability to prep with such specific notes that we could do it and do it in that way. That I know it's years now since we had to be socially distant and had to operate in that way, but that was the only way to do it, was to be prepared and every day show up with a shot list and say, this is what we're going to do, one foot in front of the other, and get it done. It ended up being, by necessity, probably the most pure form of production that I've ever been a part of, because it had to be. There was no version of it that was about anything other than telling the story. And that sounds like, oh, wasn't that always what we do? But sometimes there's all these other agendas at work. That was just about us all getting back to a place where we could do what we do and take care of each other. We were away from our families, so it was hard, but it was also more about the work than any other production I've ever been a part of, because it had to be. There are some components of scenes that we put in a vulnerable place because of time of day. I often wonder if that's a responsible thing to do sometimes. There's a scene at the end where the sun rises and there's a shot of the whole community singing, and I felt that it was a shot that should be done in the natural environment, so as, again, to keep it as grounded as it could be, if we could do it at the right time of day and have all the pieces ready to go, which is this town full of people, with the natural light in the right way, the artificial light in the right way, and be rehearsed and be solid and be ready to go. And we often put ourselves in these spots because those are the beauty moments, right? Those are the things that the earth does that lights don't always do. And we ended up in that spot And for a variety of other reasons that were almost logistical, we almost missed that opportunity. I don't know if it was a mistake, but it was risky. We got the shot. I think that my part of that would have been better if it wasn't in such a needle threading kind of moment. Until today, I haven't thought really about another way of doing it that wouldn't have involved a lot of visual effects, and I maybe would have ended up in the same place. But we often do a lot of those, like where you go, well, we just got to be there at the right time and have everybody ready, and when the time is right, go. And there's adrenaline in that, and that's exciting. But my responsibility to the show and to Mike and to myself, to the team, is to be predictable and not put ourselves in that spot. So that one I think about sometimes.
Well, you pulled it off. It worked.
It
out.
happened.
Yeah.
It's in the show, and and that's also something else that it's like, it might not be the perfect representation of that moment, but it does represent what we wanted. There've been a couple moments working with Mike where we've pushed ourselves to do something that we didn't know was possible, and until we just committed to doing it, it kind of wasn't. In Hill House, we did a series of single shots that we just took the leap, and Mike pushed us to make it better every time, and that's a very proud series of shots. Not because of anything that I did, but because it's the most team-oriented I've felt, like where every person on set had an equal and impactful role in the execution of a thing. Everybody. And I was proud for them, and proud for the fact that a team could do that and feel good about it. And so we did those shots, and every day after doing one of those shots, because it took a month to prep those shots and a day to do each one was a day. There's pride in the team doing that. And in a different way, the Midnight Mass feeling of doing something physically hard, emotionally hard, while being away from our families in the middle of a health crisis is a group achievement that, at that time, making TV shows isn't the priority. It's survival that's the priority, right? And they did that. Like, we didn't have any cases on set. Like, people took care of each other. That's the thing to be proud of.